Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Cliff Robinson, and I'm joining you from the Princeton room at the Princeton Public Library, where I am the Public Humanities Specialist. It is my honor tonight to bring to you our presenters, Camilla Townsend and Nicky K. Michael, who will present their new book, On the Turtle's Back, Stories the Lenape Taught Their Grandchildren. This book is the first collection of Lenape folklore, originally compiled by anthropologist M.R. Harrington in the early 20th century, but never published until now. Featuring stories told to Harrington by two Lenape couples, Julius and Minnie Fouts and Charles and Susan Elkhair, who sought to officially record the legends of their people before their language and cultural traditions vanished. The book also features more recent interviews with Lenape elders, which portray what these stories have meant to the people who have continued to preserve them as their cultural heritage. And it's worth emphasizing that the book will make its own contribution to the ongoing effort to preserve Lenape culture and language. On the Turtle's Back is available in the library as part of a growing collection of books about Lenape or Delaware history, culture, art, and values. Although I should add that there are currently 7 holds on the title at present. So I'll mention also that the book can be purchased through the Rutgers University Press. So that brings me to our two presenters. Camilla Townsend is Board of Governors Distinguished Professor of History at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She has published widely on Indigenous history and language in the Americas. Her books include Pocahontas and the Powhatan Dilemma and Fifth Son, A New History of the Aztecs, which won the 2020 Cundill Prize in History. Nicky K. Michael is a member of the Delaware tribe. She earned her BA in American Studies from Stanford and her PhD in History from the University of Oklahoma. She is currently the interim president of Bacone College in Muskogee, Oklahoma, where she is also the executive director of Indigenous Studies and Curriculum. She is currently serving a 7-year term on the Delaware Tribal Council. Camilla, Nicky, thank you both for being here tonight. I understand Camilla is going to present first, so at this point, I'll mute myself, and Camilla, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Cliff. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice for me to see Nicky, too. We don't always see each other that often, right? I am going to try to share my screen. Let's see.
I'll just confirm that we can't see it.
But I should have had it ready. What do they call it? Up top, right? Okay. There we go. Okay. So this book, for me, started in a strange way. Back in 2016, I was busy being a professor of Native American history at Rutgers University. And the deans, the high-level administration, decided that in honor of the 250th anniversary, we really should reckon with Rutgers' own history of participating in the dispossession of other peoples. Many colonial colleges were doing this primarily in relation to the African diaspora population, but at Rutgers, we decided that we should also include in any commemorations or publications that we did real serious engagement with the fact that Rutgers was founded just about at the same time as the last of the Lenape tribal subgroups were pushed out of the state. And while I was working on the research for that book and studying the very few remaining Lenape who were still in the state in the 1760s when the university was founded and whose young people were sent away to a boarding school in Connecticut, while I was researching that, I ended up diving into all sorts of other subjects related to Lenape history. And I found myself eventually at the archives of the museum, excuse me, the National Museum of the American Indian, which is part of the Smithsonian, as you probably know. I was looking at the papers of Mark Harrington, whom Cliff mentioned. He was an anthropologist who was actually born in Michigan, but lived most of his life in this area, in the greater New York City area. This photo that you're looking at here is of Harrington visiting some indigenous people in the Caribbean. He may be known to some of you in the audience as the author. He later wrote the book Dickon Among the Lenape, This is a famous children's book written in the 1930s, but still in print and still read. So that may be why his name rings a bell for some of you. The library undoubtedly has that book. In any event, I was looking at this man's papers in the archive of the museum because he had gone out to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, near where Nicky is from, in order to collect many stories from the Lenape people who were living there at the time in the early 1900s. Now, some of you may ask, why were the Lenape out in Bartlesville, Oklahoma? Many of you probably know all about this, but others may not. The Lenape were pressured to leave what we now think of as New Jersey, beginning in the 1600s. And by the 1700s, many of them, by the mid 1700s, most of them had in fact left. They, for a long time, remained in eastern Pennsylvania along the Delaware River, and that's when they became known to the colonists as the Delaware Indians. Today, the people use the two names Lenape and Delaware interchangeably. Lenape is the word in their own language, but Delaware is what they're perhaps even more often called. In any event, they continued to be pushed gradually further west into the Ohio Valley by the time of the American Revolution. And after the American Revolution, were pushed even beyond the valley and ended up in the early 1800s, crossing the Mississippi into Missouri, where they actually had some very horrific experiences. Were pushed further further west into Kansas, and then in the 1860s, at that point, ended up being asked yet again to move, and they went south into northeastern Oklahoma, where they have been ever since. Now, this is the main body of the Lenape or of the Delaware. Certain other branches ended up in Wisconsin and Canada, and there are even some left in Kansas, but the largest two groups actually migrated to Oklahoma. But we will be talking about the larger of the two groups in Oklahoma, the one in Bartlesville. So there Harrington was, meeting with these people who had been pushed gradually west over 200 years. The person he was talking to most was Charles or Charlie Elkhair. You see him here in this photograph with his grandson. Right? When Harrington got to Oklahoma, he was in the employ of a George High, who some of you probably know collected many items and many stories that later became the basis of the collection that is now the National Museum of the American Indian. So when he got to Oklahoma, he was actually asking people to sell him their sacred family and tribal heirlooms. And sometimes people did do that, even though it broke their hearts, but it was because they were desperate in some cases and needed the money. Well, the Delaware said, no, we're not selling you those things, but we will tell you stories. Charlie Elkhair especially was known for his rich, colorful storytelling. His wife, Susan Elkhair, was known for many of the traditional clothing outfits that she made by hand, and she's seen here wearing one that she has made. She wanted Harrington to take this photograph and publish it in whatever he would end up doing with the material they were giving him. Harrington met many other people, including Julius Fouts and his wife, Minnie Fouts. And he met, oh dear, I'm sorry, my slides are stuck. Oh, dreadful. There we go. They also met Charlie Elkhair and Susan's son, Jesse Elkhair, seen here as an older man, not long before he died in the early 1960s. So these people in their own living rooms, their own parlors, would speak in their own language, and either a friend or one of the younger people, in the case of the Elkhairs, probably either Jesse, the son, or one of their daughters, would speak the story in English, would tell the story in English. And Harrington would quickly write it down. So in the files of the Museum of the American Indian are these endless notes that he took, writing, transcribing the stories that they told. But even better, in those same files, we find letters and stories written by the Delaware people themselves. That is not transcribed by Harrington, but written down by them and mailed to him after he got back to the East Coast. So this paper, for example, dated in 1909, says, "My dear friend," it's a letter from Julius Fouts to Harrington. "My dear friend, I thought I would send you a few lines of this story. My boy got back from school and I told him to write it down." His boy, quote unquote, was his stepson, Ray, the son of his wife Minnie, and so Ray was taking down a dictation of the letter and then also of the story. The story is The Ball Player, one of Nicky's and my favorite stories. Okay? So there are about 8, maybe 9 of these stories that Harrington wasn't the mediator of at all, that the Delaware wrote down within their own community and sent off to him for the book. And they did want it to be a book. We know this because Nicky and other Delaware people told me probably it was the Native Americans who were really pushing for this project to continue and be developed. So I went back to the archive and found that indeed there was a correspondence between Harrington and especially Julius Fouts after Harrington got back east. And it was the Native Americans saying, "Why haven't you published the book yet? We've sent you the materials. Let's go. Let's move. We want this book." Harrington never did publish the book. It may have been irresponsible, but it is also true that his wife died at that time and he left the employ of the museum. But in any event, the stories ended up sitting there for all these years. Now, when I realized how much material was there, I thought, in effect, wow, I wonder what the Delaware want to do. And so I struck contact with the people out in Bartlesville. This is a picture of the Caney River, runs right next to Bartlesville. In fact, it's very near the land where Charlie Elkhair lived and told most of the stories. And as it happened, by great good fortune, when I approached the council, Nicky had started her time as a council member, had been elected to the council. And as you heard Cliff explain, she herself is a history PhD. She is now, in fact, the president of Bacone College, although at that time she was not. So Nicky said, "Yes, this is a good project. I will work with you." It became my job to research the historical background of the various history tellers, the various storytellers, and she took the story through the 20th century. So here, for instance, is the image that's on the cover of the book, a painting done in the 1960s by Ruth Blalock, the daughter of Lucy Blalock, one of the last fully fluent speakers, and in fact, Nicky's teacher. Nicky speaks Lenape, and it was this artist's mother who taught her. So what Nicky was able to do is use the research that she had done through her life, bringing the story of these stories past the moment when they were told, when they were uttered and written down in the early 1900s, and all the way up to the present day. So the book begins in the deep past, brings it up to the moment, up to where the stories were told, and then tells the reader what happened to the storytellers and their descendants afterwards, because they are very much still there, living out in Oklahoma. And I will stop sharing and turn the floor over to Nicky, who is going to tell you all about that. Okay, oops. Sorry, gang. What have I done wrong there? Oops, there we go. Okay, there we go. So Nicky, I turn it over to you to tell them all about the Delaware tribe of Indians out in Oklahoma. Right, okay.
Okay, well, let me pull the Delawares up on my share screen. And let's giving you a preview is not what the intention is. All right, so, Zoom can be a little fickle, so I'm going to go ahead and do this slideshow mode, and my computer's not going very fast. So we'll just do it this way. We'll have it off to the side and then we'll have it in full view in front of you. So Kulamosi Hamohech, Diluensi, Opatayahwe, Lenape ni, Naguiz, Pekinun, Ok Tahkokan, Ilawakan, Ok Shikakahani. So I just introduced myself as a Lenape woman, and I also expressed that I have sons. I have 6 total. I gave birth to 3 of them. And so I told you their names, and that is he appears as Blue Water, and then Fall Hunter, and then the last one is Shakakahane, which is an old straight flowing river. And that has reminiscence of not just the Caney River that Camilla just showed you, but it also speaks to his ancestry as a Delaware, close to the river. So with saying that, I also want to express that in our culture, in our ways, and it really does go across the board for most Indigenous cultures, is that being a mother is very, very important. It's a role that is very high status and valued amongst our people. So when we introduce ourselves, or when we go somewhere and that question about who we are, that's basically the epitome of a woman. And so it's always important that I express that at the get-go. And then I think most people think of Delawares and Indigenous peoples as patriarchal, but our tribe is matriarchal. And that means that our clans, our identity, and even who we're supposed to marry is all about, who you descend from in those clans. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some cultural norms and values so that you have the context of the book as well. So in 1492, a Lenape Hue, Delaware woman's life was about taking care of her children, family, and community. And guess what? Well, this was the first slide in 2017, but it's actually 2023. It's no different. Thought I changed that. 2023, the Delaware woman is still about taking care of her children, family, and community. So not much changed in that sense. But of course, the place, and the space that we occupy did. And so some of that history came from having been a victim of germ warfare and war itself. We were basically pushed out by various capacities. It was also the war itself, but it was what they also did in terms of giving the blankets with the germs in them that gave us the pox. Those things did happen, and I know some folks like to argue they didn't, but you can look in any of the journals and you'll find that they did that on purpose. So just be aware of that. And then I also want to address some components of what most people in general in the United States think of as civilization. And if I were in a classroom with you, I'd ask, what do you think the definition of civilization is? And then they would give me all these definitions. It would have to be Christianity. It would have to be technology. No, not really. If you look at the term civilization, the root word is civis, and all it means is together. So there's not much more to it. It just became loaded with all these other definitions. And so that has been what's been applied to Indigenous peoples. But if you look at it in terms of what we did, what our civilization was, we were gardening, we were cultivating, we were fishing, we were gathering, we were hunting, we were making art, pottery, baskets. So we had all the makings of a civilization. And it wasn't just kind of that surface level, there were many layers to it. So I want to show you that, but I also want to show you just a little bit of our clothing we wore back in those days. This is one of Craft's drawing. And for any society, you're going to have customs, traditions, spirituality, and religion. One of the things I do want to point out, the Treaty of Fort Pitt, and that did promise us, the Delawares, we have not forgotten this, that we were supposed to be the head of a state. We were supposed to have a member in Congress, and we were supposed to be able to remain in that state. Instead, what happens is, as Camilla told you, we were moved all the way to Oklahoma through various other states. But our way of thinking about treaties and agreements, we used the wampum belt. And wampum was actually even used as money. However, it lost its use in that capacity and is now just what we wear when we can make it. Of course, we're not on the coast, so it's not as easy for us to get a hold of wampum. But that was what recorded our treaties, and also what we like to wear for jewelry. This is our hingwik gown. This is the religion. This is the spiritual side of things. This is the missing is the face. And you saw that in the painting, that half of his face is going to be black, half of it's going to be red. And one half, that means black, it's a symbolic of men and death. And the women are the red side. That means life. And we had the missing in the big house, and he was the spirit of the gamekeeper. So it was important that we also hunted during this time, and that time would be fall. That's why I named my second son Tahgokin, because he would be the one taking care of everybody in the fall. Of course, he was born in the fall. Here is another map that can kind of show you the different directions that each of the groups took. And again, this is the Lenape tribe that my ancestors took. And then this is our sister tribe, the Delaware Nation, who is now in Anadarko. And if it would switch, there we go. So how did we survive thousands of miles from our homeland? And we still call it our homeland, Lenape Hoking. This is just a painting of what occurred when we were in the big house, the hingwik gown. And you can see that people are on different areas. That would be based on clan. And then also there would be singers, and we would be doing our dances right here. And what I would answer somebody who asked us that is that we were together. We had a tribe that was very, very connected to each other. And that was because of all of our ceremonies and our dances. Now, things happened even in Oklahoma. That's not the end of the story. We get to Oklahoma and live happily ever after. No. Unfortunately, at the time that we're giving this information to Harrington, we're also experiencing a great loss of land in Oklahoma as well. This young lady is Anna Anderson Davis, and she was 8 years old when, guess who? Frank Phillips was what was considered her guardian. And at that time, any child who had full-blood parents or a cord of blood, in some cases, it really just depended on how they looked. If they had a child, that child would be registered with the court, and the court would appoint a guardian. And that was because they considered the parents incompetent based on being full blood. So Anna had a guardian, Frank Phillips. And so when you watch Killers of the Flower Moon, you're going to find out all about the oil. Now, Anna did not receive those royalties like the Osages did. She did receive some. I'm not going to say she didn't. But the first oil well was founded on Anna's land. And Frank Phillips, built, and pretty much anybody who gets gas today has at least filled up at least more than a few times from the oil that comes from Frank Phillips and Phillips Petroleum. And that's because of Anna's land. Now today, we have numerous folks that I just want to point out, some strong Indigenous people. This is one, Dawn Duchesne. She was at Oceti Shakawan for more than a year. And for most of you, if you're not aware of what happened up at Standing Rock in 2016, she was there through a really tough ordeal and a long fight. And we ended up losing that fight. But just the fact that she was there and standing up for her people is incredible. And of course, we have someone in the military. And so you see Sarah Boyd here, and she is one of our more outspoken women now as a result of having her experiences. So I just want to show you some pictures of a few more of what we look like today. Maybe not the same look as we had in the 16th century, but we've transitioned to more contemporary styles. And this is one of them, powwow style with the buckskin and kind of crosses over to many other cultures as well, because we're not just Delawares here. Oftentimes we're 5 or 6 different tribes. That's a result of boarding schools. That's a whole nother chapter. All right, and then here you see a couple of ladies in different eras. You know, here's Grandma Jackson, and then Red Day holding babies, very similar. And then these are our turtle shells. I put these on here because these are all female turtles, and that's what we use when we're doing our ceremonies all night long. One more I want to show you, and this is actually from the 1970s, and this is where I want to kind of really emphasize what it means to be a tribe, what it means to be Lenape. This is called the bean dance, and in the bean dance, we're all holding hands, as you can see. We're following a leader who's singing the song and leading us around in lots of circles or weaving in and out, just like the bean vine would be on the Three Sisters. So some of you may have seen that in elementary school or even high school, but that is symbolic. The Three Sisters were what we use to feed our people. And so this dance is representative of that bean vine, but it's also, if you think about it, the energy that is flowing through each of these people is now connected through all of us. And so I tell my students sometimes, and it's really hard to understand, especially when it was COVID, to think about what that would be like. Especially if you have a night before, you have a tribal council and everybody's angry at some subject or another, chairs are being thrown, and the anger is really palpable. And the next day we have to come together for a ceremony. And you have to leave all that at the door because you're expected to hold hands with that same person. And really, I mean, it makes it human, right? That's what makes us a family, a tribe. And so I want to leave you with that. And I'm sure you want to ask about the book at this point. So I'm going to unshare and we can get to the meat of the matter. But I'm not sure how I can unshare. It's not going unshared.
Nikki, I
Oh,
found
sure,
it. You found it? Okay.
Got it.
Well, thank you both very much. Yeah, we can take questions now. Those of you who are in attendance here, don't be shy. Feel free to ask away. I will ask a question to get us started, just to help everyone feel a little more comfortable. So one of the things that I noticed throughout the book is that you have narrators who are men and you have narrators who are women. And I thought I'd ask, this is really a question for Nicky, like, do you feel that there is a notable difference in the way that these storytellers relate to their stories as women or as men? Is there something to say there? What do you think?
Oh, I definitely think so. Yes, it's critical. I mean, because each of the gender roles, and I know that today we are learning that there's much more than just the binary, but in our culture, those roles were very much like, if you identified as a woman, these are the things that are near and dear to you. These are the things that you're learning from those stories that you're supposed to do to fulfill your, whether it's a family or whether you're a niece or a nephew. Those are the activities or the lessons that you take away.
That's
that
great.
the stories that were narrated by women were mostly about death, but it's not what the listeners might think. They're not sort of what you might think of as a typical ghost story. They are talking to or about people who have died, but it's in an affectionate way. They're connecting. It's Nicky's point. They're connecting. They're fulfilling their role as social connectors. So in a sense, they're ghost stories, but they're loving ghost stories. They're not ghost stories that would scare somebody. But it was striking to me that I think I'd have to look again, but I think in just about every one that Harrington's notes indicate a woman told, it is primarily about talking to or remembering someone who has gone before, someone who has died. Right?
If I may add to that, thank you. That like pushed another button. The reason is because women have a stronger connection to the spirit world. You would also understand that, especially a newborn baby that comes into the world would be very connected to the spirit world. But as men grow, or as young boys grow into men, they lose that. And women, because life givers, you're connected to Mother Earth, Kahexena, she is connected to you. And so those spirits that are being talked about and talked to, that's why women typically are going to talk about the spirits world.
That's great. Thank you both so much. Well, I'm seeing we have a number of questions lining up here, so I'm going to move to those. I'm seeing one person has raised their hand as well. I'll ask that you use the Q&A so we can keep a queue going as well. So if you wouldn't mind typing your answer out there, I'd appreciate it. So the first question, I think this is probably for Nicky. And the question is, what is the connection now between the Oklahoma and New Jersey Lenape?
Well, we like to say we didn't leave anybody behind. And we don't just like to say it because it's a fact, or that we want to reinvent history. The folks that, if we had left them behind, would have been killed. It was just a very, very tough world in that day and era. So even when we get to Missouri, it's like, if you're going to be a Delaware, if you want to continue to keep your Lenape identity, you have to move with the people. And honestly, that was the safest thing for anybody to do. So we didn't leave our ancestors behind. We didn't leave our relatives behind.
Could I just add to that? Because as a fellow New Jerseyan, I want to speak clearly to my New Jersey neighbors. As Nicky has said, it wasn't allowed for someone to remain in New Jersey as a Lenape tribal member. That was the whole point. That's what East Coast removal meant, what it was all about. That is, for example, even the Trail of Tears among the Cherokee, it wasn't a question of individual policemen or soldiers going up to individuals and saying, because you are a Native American person, you must leave or I will kill you. But because you are part of a tribe, you must leave. So if you want to be part of that tribe, you must leave. It became illegal to have what they called separate governments here. So if you wanted to elect a chief, maintain your language, educate your children together, live together on the same land, in all those senses, be a tribe, you had to leave. Could an individual woman marry an individual man and stay? Yes. So there were intermarriages with Black and white people, and then those individuals stayed. But that's not that person that is no longer a Lenape tribal member. She or he is choosing another life, which is fine. And many people did that. And so some of the New Jersey Lenape are people who either feel that they are or literally are a genetic descendant of some individual who stayed. But that's not the same as being a member of a tribe. You couldn't stay as a tribe. That's what we mean when we say you were pressured out of the state. It wasn't allowed. Okay. So please understand that the Lenape as a tribe were forced to leave. These groups in New Jersey today who feel that they're connected to some 11th generation ago person who stayed, that's really wonderful that they're interested in that, but it's not the same thing as a tribal identity. And so it's very painful, bluntly, for for the tribes, the tribal members who are in Oklahoma who gave up so much, have exchanged for much poorer lands, who experienced the constant movement every 20 years in one century in the 1800s, to be told that, oh, well, the other Lenape stayed. You were just the ones who wandered off to the west. It wasn't like that at all. Okay. I'm sorry for my rant, but I can't help.
Thank you, Camilla.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, our next question is for Camilla. And well, I guess both of you, but I think Camilla, it speaks to your presentation. So the question is, how long did it take to bring the book together?
Oh, well, it was 2016. That is the 250th anniversary year when I was working originally. And so I think it was that year that I ended up being in the archive at the Smithsonian. But now it's 7 years later. I guess, how long? I think it took me at least a year, probably 2, before I found you, Nicky, right? Because I had to figure out that I was right, that what I needed to do was, I talked to a friend and colleague, a Comanche guy who works at the museum. And he said, well, you have to talk to the tribal council in Oklahoma. So I don't know, would have to look at my email, Nicky. I think it was probably at least 2018 before you and I were in touch. And then we worked on it pretty much every summer. But even I'm busy as a college professor, and Nicky is overwhelmingly busy as the president of a small tribal college that doesn't have a lot of money. So there's a lot of time and energy you're constantly pouring into keeping things going. So was what, 4 or 5 summers that we worked on it, I guess, but we did finally turn it in, not last summer, but a year ago. It takes about a year for a book to come in. So I don't know, in terms of a direct answer, I suppose if you added up all those summers, it was probably about 2 years worth of work. The stories weren't ours, someone else wrote them, but we wanted to, research all that we could about who these people were, and then pull together, transcribe, and study all the interviews that Nicky had done with elders in the 1990s, connecting them with the stories. So there was a lot to be done besides just transcribing the stories themselves.
Excellent. Okay. The second one here is for Nicky. These are 2 from the same person. The second, were these stories all familiar to you? Or did you learn anything new in the process of making the book?
Oh, absolutely. Even if you are familiar with the story, every time it's told to you again, there's something new that really kind of hits home. Some of them particularly, my boys would laugh at all the time every time they told them. So those are the funny ones, the trickster stories. But there were definitely some that I hadn't heard. And so this is a way of also kind of revitalizing that storytelling tradition that, once was very strong. And they all teach us something. And like I said, if you've heard it 10 times or 100 times, there's still something else that might pop out to you. Or maybe an elder says, this is what it means. And I'm like, oh, I totally didn't see it that way. But yeah, and I think also the writing experience, Camilla was she did a Herculean effort to make sure that we got the writing in there. I was just very fortunately in my life that I have done things not out of like conscientious effort. Sometimes it's just I was led to do it, like these interviews. And we're lucky, very fortunate to have had those, because those elders are no longer alive today. And that was really the last generation of elders that grew up with the language, that grew up with those ceremonies, at least as they were previous to kind of being more colonized. So I would say that, yes, there was a great deal I learned from doing this, and the practical side of it. But it was also something of a heart issue, not just the technical brain side of it.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question. I think this is probably for Nicky as well. How many Lenape people remain in Oklahoma or the U.S.?
Well, that depends on what our enrollment criteria is at any given moment. I say that. Not my tribe has done pretty well at keeping the enrollment pretty consistent. However, the Delaware Nation just recently voted descendancy, and that's because grandma's like, yeah, my granddaughter's like an 8, and she can't enroll. So they changed that and decided to go with descendancy. So things are shifting a bit as far as identity is concerned. And I would say when they went from 4,000 to about 10,000. So if you combine that with the Delaware's, my tribe would be 16,000. You're looking at about 26,000. Then you look up with the Muncies in Wisconsin. I can't even guess how many are there, but I don't gather it's very many. There's just not a whole lot of Mohicans and Muncies. So we could be looking at loosely maybe 30,000.
Nikki, I didn't understand something there. Did you say that because they changed the way they do enrollment in Anadarko, they went from saying that there were 4,000 people who counted to saying there's 10,000 people who counted? Does that have to do with intermarriage? Like if 2 generations have married white people, was that what they were arguing over? At what point do you not count anymore? Or
yeah, exactly. You have there's 39 tribes in Oklahoma. So each of those tribes is going to determine their own enrollment criteria. Some of them say you have to be a quarter. Some of them say you have to be an 8. And some of them say one of your parents at least has to be on the roll. So there's even more of a criteria might be you have to live in a jurisdiction. So it just depends. Every single one of those is going to be different. For the longest time, the Delaware Nation was at a quarter for their requirement because, yeah, if they've married out of the tribe, then of course the blood quantum is going to go down. Now, think about that though. If you've got 4,000 people in a tribe, how many of them do you think you're related to?
Right. They have to marry out. No, I mean, every friend I have.
Most of them are going to be your cousins, right? So you are
marry
left
out.
with very little choice but to marry outside of that. And even if it's another native, that other native, that blood doesn't count. Sometimes they're starting to go into, they'll count over other people's blood, your other tribe's blood. But most of them are just, what is your Delaware bloodline? And that's it. So I think recently the trend is that way again, because if grandparents are not able to put their grandchildren and they're like maybe a 16th even on the rolls, then that gets kind of hurtful, right? Because, well, they're more Indian than the other one. And, that just gets into like this kind of a hierarchy of like who's more Indian than who kind of thing. And we're already very much the crumbs. We get the crumbs of the United States. And so that what we fight over and scrap over only gets worse when you start pitting us against each other based on some kind of identity politics.
Okay, great. I think this question's a natural follow-up in some ways. This one's in the chat, actually, so I'll read that one out. As I understand it, the Lenape language is part of the Algonquin language family. Are there similarities between Lenape stories and those of other Algonquin groups?
Very much so. And in fact, not only other Algonquian-speaking groups, but the Iroquoians. I mean, they lived next door to the Iroquoians for many generations. So the story of the woman who fell from the sky onto the turtle's back, the story of the title, is shared by the Iroquoians. And we know that it really was both theirs. It isn't that one took it from the other in the 18th century, because missionaries mentioned this story, visiting both tribes separately in the 1600s. So the people of the Northeast shared this creation story. And then likewise, as they moved west, they told stories at firesides with other Native American people, friends, relatives, etc. So we find in the stories many old elements, old in the sense that they come from the Northeast, like the many stories about Northeastern bears, even though these stories are being uttered in Oklahoma. But we also find stories that share ancient elements with Indians who would have who lived in the Southwest and who might have traded, say, with the Lenape on the Santa Fe Trail when they were living in Kansas, etc. One of my favorite, Chalchutlicue in Nahuatl, in the Aztec language, and many of the Uto-Aztecan languages, is a woman who shakes her skirts to create the thunders, and is kind of frightening because people can drown in the storms that she brings. And in the Lenape story, she promises that she will always warn them. She will shake her skirts extra loud and make thunder so they know when a really dangerous storm is coming. Well, this is a story element that is shared with other tribes. So you're absolutely right to think there's a lot of sharing, and I would only say it even goes beyond other Algonquian language speakers. Okay, it's quite extraordinary studying Native stories to see the extent of the shared. I guess I could say shared cultural grammar. The vocabulary is different, the specifics are different, but they're deeply similar to each other, especially in comparison to outsider religions like Christianity.
Mhm.
So, right.
Yeah, there's several words.
Sorry, Nikki. No, go
that's
ahead.
okay. I mean, I worked with the up at Bemidji State, so I got to really really look into the Ojibways and some of their stories and culture, and of course it's beautiful up there. They taught me a lot of things about being a Delaware. Actually, they're one of few tribes that remember that we're the grandfathers. The Shawnees are some of the others that do remember we're the grandfathers. And that means we're the oldest Algonquin speakers, that we're the peacekeepers, which is why the grandfather is such an important status. But there are certain words that we have noticed that go across the board, and it's usually two, Nisha. And then you can even talk to some Arapahoes so they're way far away, and became Plains tribes, and their number two is Nisha. And then Kwe, woman, up in Bemidji, the Ojibwe would say Ikwe. So very similar. I think the Ojibways in their kind of removing from the East Coast to not fully west, but just on its way. I think it just became easier to use G's instead of K's. So it just became and morphed into something that was practical, I think, for folks. And same thing that happened, I think, with Algonquins who went into the plains areas. But of course, you can look at that and go, okay, well, if they originally came as Algonquins from the eastern part of the United States and they end up in the plains areas, they adapt and become bison hunters, right? So culturally, they do all those same things, but they're in the plains and they share our language. So again, you have lots of interesting dynamics that occurred that doesn't isolate us. We were not just Lenape and we didn't talk to anybody else, right? There was a lot of sharing, a lot of even warfare, yes, but it was a different kind of warfare. And you'll get some of that out of those stories as well.
Excellent. Okay. We have at least a couple more questions, but I'm going to jump to our last question next, because this person was actually the first person to raise their hand, and as I directed them to the Q&A. So here we are. Can you say if and how these stories reflect Lenape ethics and morals as they pertain to human relations, both between tribe members and with outsiders? I think that's probably for Nikki, yeah.
Well, it just so happens that Camilla and I are thinking of another book, and we'll talk about some of those. So it's not, you're just getting the first vibe, right? I mean, the overview of some of them, but how do you analyze them, right? Like, what does this mean? One of my, again, our favorites, with the ballkeeper, particularly as it relates to MMIW today. And some of you may not know what that means. MMIW stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And they've added girls and they've added people because, well, we're realizing it's not just the women that are targeted, but they're easier for a predator to look at and know that they're not going to get caught. And so oftentimes our numbers of missing are 10 times the national rate. And it's such a problem that even Congress is trying to figure out how to address it. So in this story, it really, really struck me. And this, again, like, do you ever learn anything new? But when I read that when I was younger, and then now I read it and I was like, this is telling our men how to treat women, that if a woman is stolen, that they're all supposed to go after her and fight with every bit of their being to get her back. And they, in this story, do not succeed the first few times, but the final is when he's spiritually connected and he uses all of his resources, he's able to rescue her. And the rest of his brothers come back to life after that.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we look forward to the next book then also.
Right. Well, the story is in this
Right.
book, but Nikki and I want to write more about just this story because it's rich, right? I don't know. I would also say one thing that really struck me as an outsider to the culture is that the heroes are people who are successful at working with others, who are learning a lot themselves, as opposed to being really charismatic, buff, awesome guys who run around winning all the time, right? Okay, right. I mean, even in this story, the ballkeeper, the brother who finally succeeds does so because he learns to work with the animals. And there have been many mistakes made along the way, as some of his brothers have died, as she said. So it's not this kind of rescue story that we're used to hearing in the West. Okay. So I found that over and over again, a kind of striking sense that a hero can even bumble around sometimes. He's got to learn something, or the people around him have to learn something. The story doesn't end with bumbling, but it's really quite remarkably different in terms of what it says about how you should go through life. You can make mistakes, you must learn, you must help each other, keep trying, learn again. So different from what we call hero stories. So.
Excellent. Okay. Well, this question, I think there's a sort of a personal question. It's nice. Do either of you have a favorite folk tale or story from the collection? If so, what is it? I like that angle.
I guess we have to tell them about something else other than the ball player now, since we just did it. Oh, you know which one I really loved? What was it called? Rock Shut Up, a Sunkapon. And this is, again, it's very similar to another Northeastern tale, but a boy is orphaned and ends up being left in the woods. And he's raised by bears. And he eventually, as an adult, is brought back to his people. And one would think that he would be grateful to the bears who have raised him, but instead he uses his knowledge of their life ways to help human beings hunt them. So he uses what he's learned by living among them against them. And the bears aren't having it. And they have to figure out how, not only how to stop him, but how to get even with him for being cruel. And in the end, it's actually quite funny. It's a little bit like a Monty Python skit, but they do teach him a thing or two. Okay, so I like the idea of a story about the fate of an orphan. I like the idea of the story about animals being involved, almost as if they were people. And I like that the animals have the last laugh, so to speak. So I think those are the elements that make me like the story. I'm not sure why, but I really love it. And they loved it too. And I say this because in Harrington's notes, he has 3 versions of it. So he starts a sort of a false start, and then someone says, no, I'm beginning again. And then another day he continues. So they clearly wanted to tell this story and work with this story also.
You can't ask me to pick one.
Nikki, you told me a story that's not in the book, the modern story about your friend whose brother was dying. Tell that story. It's not in the book, but they will love it.
Okay. So in the interviews, Grandma LG is one of those I interviewed, and she didn't actually get into the book. So this is our way of commemorating what she told us. And she had a brother. She was one of like 7 children, and her brother was passing away, and she'd go visit him in the hospital, and his dying request was to have fry bread. And for those of you who don't know, fry bread became one of our staples. It's actually just bread dough, and you put it in oil and you fry it, just like what it sounds like. But believe me, this is not as simple as it sounds, as Algie would say. She said she started to do, she would make fry bread, and because she wanted to honor her brother. And she said, my fry bread was so bad, the dog wouldn't even eat it. The dog literally spit it out, she said. Oh, so she would have to go back and do it again. And she kept doing it until she finally got it right. And then she took it into her brother, and that was about the time that he did pass. And this is a true story. So Algie actually cooked fry bread for probably a good 50 years after that. And wherever she went, she's the first thing she would talk about or even think about before she even cooked fry. Again, women connecting to the spirit. So she would cook that fry bread in honor of her brother. And of course, when she asked for that spiritual connection, the fry bread would always turn out good.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much. I think we can't prevail upon you for any more time. So thankfully,
right.
What's that?
I didn't realize it was 8:30.
Yeah, we've already reached the hour. Yeah.
Right.
So I'll thank you both so much for coming. I'll recommend to everyone that they borrow, or if you can manage, buy the book. And we very much look forward to the coming publication as well.
Thank you very much.
Just a little reminder that all the proceeds go to the Delaware elders.
Right.
Yeah, we're not.
All the royalties go to the Delaware. Right.
All right. Wanishi, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.